1 Kings, the 21st chapter, there's the story of Naboth's vineyard, and we all know the story well. I'll kind of summarize it and such. But you remember that Ahab wanted to build a vegetable garden next to his palace in Jezreel, and that's where Naboth had a vineyard. And so he went to Naboth, and Naboth wouldn't give him the vineyard for anything because he said it was his inheritance. So in true kingly fashion, Ahab goes and pouts on his bed. Jezebel comes along and says, what's bothering you? And he tells her, and so she says, don't worry about it, I got this. So she sends a letter to the city leaders, and tells them to put Naboth in front of everybody, bring a couple of unscrupulous guys up and have them lie and say that he has blasphemed God and spoken against the king, and take him out and stone him. And that's exactly what they did. And so she then goes to Ahab and says, go take your vineyard. And he does. Now, after telling that story, if I told you, okay, what we have here is an example of a very shrewd businesswoman, and I want you to emulate what she does, you'd be going, you're off your rocker. And it would be, okay? And such. And yet, we have a parable in Luke the 16th chapter, which, if you're not careful, you can draw the wrong conclusions from. And so this parable, it immediately follows on the heels of the parable of the prodigal son, okay? And we know that the various people heard that parable, and there were the disciples and there were the Pharisees. And although this parable is addressed to his disciples, we know that the Pharisees were there and they heard it, and we know that from verse 14. This parable is also followed by another story of the rich man and Lazarus. So you have kind of a theme of wealth here involved, and none of it good. Let me just say that. So, the health and wealth preachers tend to ignore these kinds of things, okay? Because none of these parables, none of these stories really have a positive spin on wealth. But that doesn't seem to stop them. Anyway, let's move on. So, in Luke the 16th chapter, we'll read through this and then we'll kind of back up and make a few points and such. He also said to the disciples, there was a rich man who had a manager, and charges were brought to him that this man was wasting his possessions. So your translation may say squandering. Actually, squandering is probably a better translation there. But he's squandering his possessions. And he called him and said to him, what is this that I hear about you? Turn in the account of your management, for you can no longer be manager. And the manager said to himself, what shall I do, since my master is taking the management away from me? I am not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. I have decided what to do, so that when I'm removed from management, people may receive me into their houses. So, summoning his master's debtors one by one, he said to them, how much do you owe my master? He said, 100 measures of oil. He said to him, take your bill and sit down quickly and write 50. Then he said to another, how much do you owe? He said, 100 measures of wheat. He said to him, take your bill and write 80. The master commended the dishonest manager for his shrewdness, for the sons of this world are more shrewd in their dealing with their own generation than the sons of light. And I tell you to make friends for yourselves by means of unrighteous wealth, so that when it fails, they may receive you into eternal dwellings. So, this is often misunderstood, and we're going to kind of walk through it, and then we're going to kind of jump to some other scriptures that will help us understand this as well. Now, sometimes, as we saw in the case of Joseph, slaves were promoted to over households and over the wealth of of someone. But in this particular case, this was not a slave. Your translation may say steward, manager, doesn't make any difference. That's what it is. And such. He was employed by this man. Had he been a slave, I'm sure he would not have simply removed him from his position as manager. So he was employed by this man, and he was going to be terminated from his employment for mismanagement. Let's put it that way. And he was told to give an account. In other words, he was told to bring the books and turn them in. Now, as an accountant, okay, we understand what the books mean. Okay, that is an accounting of the business. And they did the exact same thing. They had an accounting of their businesses. It was, sometimes we look back and we think that they were, primitive in their business dealings, and they were simply not. They operated pretty much the same way we do today, and such. He had an account. He had to give an account for those things. He kept account. He kept books and such. And he is told, you're going to have to turn those in because you are no longer be manager. And so the manager said to himself, what shall I do since my master is taking my management away from me? I am not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. So he gives himself two options here. He doesn't want to work, okay? Why should he do that? He hasn't been working this far, okay? And he says, I'm too ashamed to beg. Now, certainly back in that time, you didn't go around begging if you were an able-bodied person. But even that was below him, so he didn't want to do that. And he says there, I've decided what to do. Now, this is very interesting here because this phrase, I've decided what to do, it doesn't really bring forth what the idea is. Now, Linsky says that the particular aorist marks the sudden arrival of the knowledge on which the man resolves to act. In other words, what this really is saying is, he says, I don't know what to do. Wait a minute. I got it. That's the idea there. So he thinks about it and he says, oh, okay, I've got it. What, when I'm removed from management, that people may receive into me into their houses, I've got it figured out. I don't want to beg. I don't want to work. I want to be received. I want to be taken care of. I've been taken care of all this time. So, summoning his master's debtors one by one, this is a poor translation, it's basically every one of his debtors. Now, he gives only two examples here and everything, but I'm sure that in the wealth that the master had, there was a lot of debtors involved here and everything, and the Greek says that he summoned every one of them, okay? And so he gives a couple examples here. And he said to the first, how much do you owe my master? He said, 100 measures of oil. He said to him, take your bill, sit down quickly and write 50. Now, what is happening here is the way that this was done at that time, and the way it would be done today as well. The contract was in the hands of the manager here. Okay, wouldn't have been in the hands of the debtor, okay, because he could do anything he wanted with it. The contract was in the hands of the manager. Now, the manager couldn't just simply go in there and say, let's change it, okay, forge it, that comes out, that doesn't work, okay. He basically takes it back to him and says, write a new contract. Only this time, put that. They both sign it, puts it back in the books. Everything is copacetic. Everything is legit, so to speak, okay? You go before a court at that time, the only contract there is 1 for 50. He said 100 measures of oil. Now, very interestingly here, he gives a couple of examples here, and this is the Greek would be a bath and everything, and that's between 8 and 9 gallons. So we're talking about 800 to 900 gallons of oil. Okay, pretty significant amount of money. And he says, write 50. And so he goes to another, and he says, how much do you owe? And he says, 100 measures of wheat. This is a core and such. And it is 10 to 12 bushels, a core is 10 to 12 bushels of wheat. So in this particular case, he's talking about 1,000 bushels of wheat. Okay, and so this is significant amounts of money, and he's whittling it down. Now, people will try to make a correlation here between the amounts of what these things probably traded for at that time, and that's really taking this parable too far. Okay, he's just simply making a way for himself. He's looking out for himself, and that's all that this is really telling us. You can't make a equivalent measure out of the money that's involved here. He is simply providing for himself. Now, one of the things that I think that we can draw from this is that, well, three things that we can draw from this. I'll put it that way. There's three things that we can draw. Number one is one sin always leads to another. So in this particular case, you see that it's followed by many more. He has squandered his master's possessions. And so what does he do? Does he say, I'll pay it back? I'll try to make this right? I'll change my ways? No. He goes to every one of his master's debtors and cheats his master even more. One sin generally leads to another. Number two, men who commit a sin cannot consistently get along without committing many more. It's like this. When someone lies, it's generally not a lie, because you have to have more lies to convince people that that lie is the truth. One lie leads to another. You know, when your kids are little and you know they you ask them, did you clean your room or something like that? They go, yeah. You know, isn't it funny how they never figure out how in the world do you know that they're not telling the truth? But they go, yeah, clean my room. Right. Yeah. But one lie leads to another. One sin leads to another. And it generally does, because you've got to cover it up. You know, in accounting, there's a fraud that's called kiting, and I've never understood why anybody would attempt to kite. Okay, one of the companies I worked for, we had a Canadian division, and one of our people in the Canadian division was kiting, and eventually it got caught up. And kiting is one of those things that one leads to another. Now, what that is that you've got a debtor and they owe you money, multiple debtors, and they owe you money. Well, you take this payment from this person that owes the company money and you pocket it. Well, how are you going to cover it up? Well, the next time a payment comes in from somebody else, you take that payment and you apply it to this one. Okay? But you see what's happening here. It will multiply. You're always trying to stay ahead of the game. And at some point, you got to have that money. You got to have some more money. So you take, well, I got by with that one, so I'll take some over here. Now you've got to apply other two payments It's two different accounts, and it just multiplies. Ultimately, it will catch up. But you see how one sin will always lead to another. Thirdly, sinners are selfish. They think of themselves. That's why they're sinful. You know, the whole idea of being a Christian is what? To deny yourself. What was he thinking of? Was he thinking about taking care of his master? Was he thinking about doing what was right? Was he thinking about, I'm going to be a good manager? No, he was thinking about lining his pockets. And then when he got caught, he was thinking about, how am I going to keep this going? So, you're dealing with somebody who is unrighteous, who is committing fraud, doing all these things. They cannot be trusted to not continue that. Now, I want to take a side point here, okay? And just bear with me a moment. You know, we have to be careful as Christians when we engage with people and we talk to them about various things, particularly the gospel. Because you cannot engage with somebody who is disingenuous, and I'll use the term win, okay? You cannot win. For example, if you're dealing with a Jehovah's Witness, they are allowed to lie to you in order to convert you. So how do you know what they're saying? How can you trust them? How can you trust anything that they say? You can never win in that situation. You can never win against somebody who's willing and allowed to lie. So we have to be cautious as Christians because we operate under a higher moral law and such. Anyhow, let's get back on track here. So he says, do this quickly because he's on a timetable here. And so it gets down here and it says, the master commended the dishonest manager for his shrewdness. Now, at first, you look at this and go, that seems kind of strange. He's been swindled, and now he's been swindled again. But you have to look at this from the worldly standpoint. He is duly impressed by the cunning of this guy. You know, he should have fired him immediately. Okay, he should have and everything. But he's like, well, pretty smart. He's a worldly manager. He got worldly wealth. This guy's got worldly wealth, and he's got a worldly manager. And so he is impressed by the clever way that he's provided for himself. Now, you know, just think if he had put all that shrewdness to account and do his job. You know, we all know people that work harder at getting out of work than they would if they had just worked at it. You know, seems to be the case here. But he comes to this point, and he says, commended the dishonest manager for his shrewdness, and then Jesus says, for the sons of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than the sons of light. Now, this phrase kind of completes the parable, and it shows Jesus' reason for telling it. And this, when he says, the sons of this world, or the sons of this age, that's what it's, aeon is the Greek word there, and it means age. And we use that same idea. We talk about the people of this age, or what's going on in this age and times and everything. And we're simply talking about the world around us and what it and where it is at this particular place. And he says that it's the age in which we live. And so he says the sons of this world or age are more shrewd. And he says that they are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than the sons of light. It's talking about us. He says that the people of the world are more shrewd and cunning in dealing with their own kind than we are. Now, what does he mean by that? Because that's kind of a shocking statement, isn't it? I mean, they go, what? What are you telling me? Because this is an important point. This is the whole point of the parable. And so if we don't understand what Jesus is saying here, we'll never understand what this parable is about. He says they are more shrewd in dealing with their generation than we are. So what he's saying is that our interest, he makes that point in the next verse, but our interest is eternal. Their interest is in the world, is in what's here, and it's temporal, and it's in gain, and it's in riches, and it's in power, and it's in whatever they're interested in. Ours is eternal. Do we put the same amount of effort? Do we put the same amount of desire? Do we put an equivalent amount of effort to get what we want as the world does, get what they want? That's a problem. That's what Jesus is saying. You know, they will do whatever it is. You know, you've met people that at work or whatever, they will put in whatever it takes to get what they want. You know, I'm utterly amazed at particularly athletes. They will work out, they will spend time in the gym, they will watch every bite, every morsel that they put in their mouth. They will work on every nuance of whatever sport that they are involved in. And they will do that from morning until night in order to achieve what they are desiring to achieve. And he says they're more shrewd than we are because we don't put in that same amount of effort. Now that's a scary thought. We have to realize that in order to achieve eternal life, we have to put in effort. We've got to put in the same dedication. We've got to have the same desire. We've got to have the same motivations that everybody else out in the world puts into what they will get. Many times, as Christians, we don't. And that's the reason he says they're more shrewd in dealing than the sons of light. Put in that same effort. He says, and I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of unrighteous wealth, so that when it fails, they may receive you into eternal dwellings. Now, a couple of things here. So that that's not in the Greek. And so some translations will say, when you fail. Now, it's not a big deal because it indicates the same thing. We'll talk about that in a moment. That they may receive you, okay, or you may be received. That's all it says. That it's not they may receive you, it is received in the Greek. So depending on the translation, they'll have it one way. Some translation might have it another way. But the point is, he says, make friends for yourselves by means of unrighteous wealth. And what does that friends mean? We'll talk about that in a moment. What is that? So that when it fails, or you fail, what is the parallel here? The parallel is that the manager was being discharged from his duties. Okay? As far as the Christian, when the Christian is discharged from his duties, that is when? Death. So whether it fails, you fail, whatever, that's what he's talking about. That you may be received into the eternal dwellings. We're looking for a heavenly home, and that is when we go to the heavenly home, is at our death. So he says that they may receive you, or you may be received. So some people look at this and go, well, make friends for yourselves by means of unrighteous wealth. Means that you have to do something with your wealth here. So that's talking about fellow Christians or whatever, the poor and everything. Others say, well, wait a second. It is that they may receive you, talking about God in Christ. So it's making friends of God in Christ. So which is it? Okay? Is it earthly people, or is it God in Christ? What does that mean when he says make friends? Well, getting ahead of myself. Look at my notes. So we'll get to that in just a moment. Let's talk about unrighteous wealth here, because that is kind of confusing too. He says, make friends for yourselves by unrighteous wealth. Well, unrighteous wealth, you look at that and go, that's kind of strange. But you see, I think that what he's saying here is that riches, wealth, some translations will say mammon, okay, which is just a transliteration of the Greek word that means riches or wealth. That money has always had, and it does today, and it did back then, the connotation of being tainted. Okay? Now, we can't get along without it. I mean, that's the fact. We have to have it. But it carries with it that which is tainted. Okay? It carries with it the idea of it's luring. Okay? It's tempting. It has the qualities of causing you to covet. It has these various qualities. In fact, we can look at this. The love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Okay? We can look at Hebrews the 13th chapter, 5th verse. Keep your life free from the love of money. Matthew 19:24. I tell you, it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich person to enter the kingdom of heaven. In Luke 8:14, it says that the cares and riches and pleasures of life choke out the gospel. So, and again in Proverbs, whoever trusts in his riches will fail. So, you look at that, it has this concept of being tainted. So when he says unrighteous wealth, he's not talking about anything other than the fact that it has a connotation with it. We have to have money to live and trade and do whatever, okay? But it is fleeting. Never forget that. It is something that goes away. Anyway, so let's talk about who are the friends that he said you're to make friends with unrighteous wealth. The poor, Christians, God, Christ. Who is it? Well, I think in a sense, it's all of the above. And so we go to Matthew the 25th chapter, and he says there, when the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, then he will sit on his glorious throne. Before him will be gathered all the nations, and he will separate people one from another as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he will place the sheep on his right, but the goats on his left, on the left. Then the king will say to those on the right, come, you are blessed by my Father, and inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me. Then the righteous will answer him, saying, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you a drink? And when did we see you a stranger and welcome you, or naked and clothe you? And when did we see you sick and in prison and visit you? And the king will answer them, truly I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of these my brothers, you did it to me. Make friends of unrighteous mammon, or unrighteous wealth. How do we do that? one of the things, and it was alluded to by Logan at the table, and that is when we give, we're giving our money, and we're giving our money, and it is going overseas in some cases. It is for the spread of the gospel in various places around the world. It is going to help out the people in Malawi that have suffered horrendously from floods and such. It goes to various things to help spread the gospel here. It goes to helping the saints, the needy saints. It goes and that provides those things. And Jesus says, when you've done it to them, you've done it to me. So that you may be welcomed or received into eternal salvation. Now, we'll go on with this. And as you remember, he goes on and he says, to those on his left, depart from me, you cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. And he goes through the same list and he says, you didn't do this to me. You didn't do this for me. And they will also answer, Lord, when did we see you? Hungry or thirsty or a stranger or naked or sick in prison and did not minister to you? And he says, and since you didn't do it to the least of these, you did not do it to me. Make friends for yourselves so that you may be received into an eternal home. Now, one of the things we're kind of like a quick point about, little side step again. You look at these things in Matthew the 25th chapter, and he says, you're going to get received in because you did these things. In our parable, he says to make friends with unrighteous wealth so that you may be received in. In Revelation the 20th chapter, we see this. And it says, and the dead were judged by what was written in the books according to what they had done. So, as we've been going through Romans, there's the continued theme that we have to address, because much of the religious world says you don't have to do anything. Well, what is this all about if you don't have to do anything? We do because we trust. We do because we are slaves to righteousness. We do because God gave his son on the cross, and we are eternally grateful for the grace that came to us. If somebody saved your life tomorrow, went into a burning building, whatever the situation is, whatever this is, and pulled you out at the risk of their life, and maybe they died in the process of doing it, you certainly wouldn't walk away from that family and go, well, tough luck for him. You would probably spend the rest of your life trying to somehow, knowing you could never pay it back, somehow express your gratitude for that. In Matthew, the 17th chapter and 7th verse, and I love this. This is supposed to be in my lesson on Romans in our printer didn't print on the page. Anyway, He says, will any of you who has a servant, this is a slave, this is doulos, okay? We don't deal with slaves today, okay? And many people will want to say, when you see that word, slave or servant, doulos, and I've done this before, so, okay? Sometimes we equate that with it in order to try to get an understanding. We equate it to an employee-employer situation, okay? That's not, you can't really do that. It's a slave. Slave does whatever you tell them to do, period. And they take whatever you give them, period. We don't live in that kind of time and such. And so it's a little hard for us to grasp. But put yourself for a moment in this situation. Jesus says, will any of you who has a slave, a servant, plowing or keeping sheep say to him when he is coming from the field, come at once and recline at table? Will he not rather say to him, prepare supper for me, dress properly, serve me while I eat and drink, and afterwards you will eat and drink? That's what slaves do. That's the way the slave-master relationship works. Does he thank the servant because he did what was commanded? We were talking about this the other day at home, and we were talking about this, and I said, you see, you wouldn't do that. And Deanna goes, well, I would. And I said, yeah, you probably would. You know. But, so do you thank the servant because he did what was commanded? Now, that's an important point. We've been commanded to do all these good works. There's not one that we can come up with and go, well, this wasn't commanded of me, and so I went and did it, and I did above and beyond, so I'm now owed. No, everything that we do as a good work has been commanded us. He says you don't get thanked for doing what was commanded. In fact, so you also, when you have done all that you were commanded, say, we are unworthy servants, slaves, we have only done that was our duty. That duty simply means obligation. We've only done what we've been obliged to do. When we've done everything that we've been commanded, we've only done what we've been obliged to do. It doesn't make any difference how much we do, okay? We will never be put in a position where we or God is indebted to us. It simply will never take the place. And so, yes, we will be judged on what we do, but it will never merit us anything. We'll be judged on what we do because it is an outpouring of the faith or the trust that we have in God. Anyway, so can man be profitable to God? Absolutely not. There is nothing that God needs from us. Everything goes one direction. We need God. We need everything God has. Anyway, in Luke the 16th chapter, we'll wind this thing down. He says, one who is faithful in very little is also faithful in much, and one who is dishonest in a very little is also dishonest in much. If then you have not been faithful in unrighteous wealth, if you've not been faithful with what God has blessed you with, who will entrust, just a little side note here, that is pistio, where we translate the word faith, who will entrust you to the true riches? And if you've been unfaithful, if you've not been faithful in that which is another's, who will give you that which is your own? No servant can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. Now, very quickly here, this word is not in the Greek, okay? Who will entrust you to that which is true. Okay? But this is really just axiomatic. Okay? And we understand this, that if you're not faithful in little things, you're not going to be faithful in a lot of things and such. So, when we talk about what is true, okay, if you've not been faithful in unrighteous wealth, who will entrust you to that which is true? And I think that this is a point that we don't want to miss, okay? He's comparing that which is true, okay, not just heavenly realm, heavenly, a heavenly home, okay? We're to lay up for ourselves treasures in heaven, okay? But I don't think he's just comparing that when he says that which is true. You know, wealth fades. I don't know if you ever thought about it. You reach in your pocket, and as it was passed around this morning, either put in money or a check. It's paper. Paper. Seriously? Paper. Now, it represents something. We're going to a system in many ways in which money disappears. In fact, I'm not sure it's in Sweden or Finland and everything. They've tried very hard to do away with all paper forms of money and go fully digital, period. I mean, you go in someplace, what do? You whip out a plastic card. Now, wait for it. Everything we have that says wealth is fading. Even what that paper money represents, okay, gets less. It's called inflation. And it goes, things go up. You know, boy, this is dating me. Whew. When I was little, okay, 250 years ago, when I was little, you could go in to the local five and dime there in Hilton with a quarter and come out with 25 pieces of candy. And if you were, I can't think what's it called now, but if you were really clever, you went in and you bought those little pieces that had it was like taffy and it had like 4 pieces in it for a penny. So you got, it was quadrupled up there. It was great. Okay. Inflation will always be, it's always going away. It is not true. But there is something that is true. And you can't be entrusted with what is not true, unrighteous wealth, and use it properly, then who's going to trust you with that which is true? Anyway, he says here, you cannot serve God and money. Now, this one must have struck a chord with the Pharisees. For the Pharisees, who were lovers of money, heard all of these things and they ridiculed him. After all of that, they didn't get it. After all that was said, the Pharisees still didn't get it. And he said to them, you are those who justify yourselves before men, but God knows your heart. This is a big point that we could spend a lot of time on. For what is exalted among men is an abomination in the sight of God. What do men exalt? Power. We're humble ourselves. Fame. We're humble ourselves. Wealth. We've already been talking about that. Everything that the world exalts, not every, it's like there may be things that people praise in the world. Oh, look, they gave all this money to the poor. That's a good thing, yeah, but not general. Most stuff in the world is an abomination to God, and it doesn't take 15 seconds of reading the headlines to see what men are praising today. Inclusivity. You don't even need to go there. It's an abomination to God. Anyway, we'll stop there. And I appreciate your time and attention this morning. I hope that you've learned something from this that I did anyway. Maybe as we go forward in our Christian lives, that we can be encouraged to make friends with the wealth that we have, so that we may be entered into a home with heaven and with God in heaven. If you're here and you're not a Christian, then you must come believing, repenting, confessing, and being baptized. Now that believing just isn't a mental assent. It is putting your trust, your absolute trust in God, in His Word, in His Son, and so that whatever His Word says, that's what you will do. That you will repent, you will change your life. It's not, well, I'll do this, but I still got, there's still things out there I enjoy. It'll be all right. No, you repent, you change your life, you confess Him, and you buried in a water agreement of baptism that your sins may be washed away. If there's one of you that is subject to this, we ask that you come or we stand.